A man named Janez Ruiz was a shoemaker in Germany in the Second World War. And in an effort to kind of get ahead, he joined the local Nazi party and wanted to get some connections, have a little notoriety. But then in 1945, they lost. And he realized he had chosen the wrong side. And so he was fearful. He thought, well, I'm not going to be able to convince people that I wasn't a part of all these atrocities that I'm hearing about. The Allied troops are going to label me, a Nazi sympathizer. I might get thrown into jail or worse. And so he decided that he was going to hide. And so he kind of found a remote place to hide. He ended up near where his sister lived, and he ended up in her barn and made a place for him to live there, 1945, after the war was over. He was discovered in 1978. He was so fearful that for 33 years, that was his home, and that was his life. Have you ever been afraid? We are in week number 4 of our teaching, week number 5, but topic, week number 5 in our this whole a series we're doing called Enemies of the Soul. Because we said that even though we choose to follow Jesus, and Jesus makes us new, we're brand new people, He gives us a new heart, we're a new creation, that doesn't mean that everything just gets perfect all right away. Because our souls, the seat of our decisions and what we do, still needs to be changed to be more like Jesus. And there are certain things that war against that, because our enemy would love for us to be broken Christians. But God is inviting us into something more. And so He said this happens, and we get this freedom by surrendering. And so here's what we've looked at so far. You can go back and listen to these if you want. We looked at our identity. We said if we don't see ourselves the way our Heavenly Father sees us, then this creates this faulty foundation that messes up everything else we do in life. And then we looked at this idea of repentance, that unrepentance is an enemy, because when we hold secrets and we don't bring them to light, it prevents the kind of growth that God desires. And then we looked at the flip side of that, which is unforgiveness, because if we harbor unforgiveness in our souls, it damages us. It actually prevents us, it hurts us, it makes it so that we live lives that are sick. And then we looked at our wounds, the wounds from our past. We said if we don't bring these to God, they can prevent us from being and becoming who God has designed us to be. And then last week, Mike began to walk us through fear. And Mike used the story of Israel to begin to look at this soul enemy of fear. All of these, if they're not dealt with, can leave us locked up or with unhealthy souls. So today, we're going to look at fear a little bit more. I call it fear part 2. And the reason I'm doing this is because fear, in my experience, is common to every single person and is one of the biggest enemies of a healthy soul. And we're going to unpack that in a second. But I want you to think for a second, when the last time was you were afraid? Or maybe the time you were most afraid. I was convinced by my future son-in-law at the time to go skydiving with him, which is something I always wanted to do. And it's really cool and it's exciting until they open the door of the airplane at 15,000 feet. And you see the person in front of you jump out. And I don't know if anybody's ever watched these things. What you picture in your head is that someone just jumps, right? And then they kind of float. That's not what happens. Because the plane's going 100 miles an hour. So what happens is they do this. And they're gone. Because you're going... And you're never, if you're not first, you get to watch everybody go first. And then they get to the door, and of course, you're in tandem. And the guy's like, are you ready? All right, let's go. You want to do something fun? Yeah, let's do a flip. And you're like, oh, whatever. There is a moment of utter terror, of course, followed by the most amazing experience of your life. It's fantastic, right? But most of us have had things in our lives that we fear. This is a common experience. The Bible, we said this before, is the command to do not fear. Matt was talking about that at the beginning, is the most common command in Scripture. And as Mike shared last week, the reason this matters so much is because fear actually prevents us from growth. It blocks opportunities. It makes it so that our souls make bad decisions. In fact, I would say it this way. The people of God make more mistakes and bad choices during times of fear than at any other time. Now, I don't know how you responded to Mike's message last week, because I feel like most of us are in one of several different camps. Maybe you're one of those persons who say, that's not me. You said, I appreciate it, Mike. Thank you for talking about fear. I'm not a fearful guy. I'm not a fearful woman. This really isn't a thing for me. I'm pretty fearless. How many of you exist in the audience today? I was going to ask you to put up your hands, because then you're the people I was going to ask to come up and speak in the future weeks, since you have no fear. And people are putting their hands back down. Yeah, okay. Now, that might be you, and you might be the person who just says, I'm not sure this doesn't describe me. Maybe you truly don't have an issue. That is possible. What I hope from today that you'll glean some things that will help you when and if this arises in your life. There's another group of people that are, I would call them nicely, fraidy cats, right? So these are people, they just know that. I'm fearful all the time. I'm scared of everything. I don't want to try new foods. I don't want to drive new places. I mean, they know they're fearful of all kinds of things. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if that's you, okay? My guess, though, is the vast majority of us are somewhere in between. In other words, we acknowledge that we do have some fears. We recognize them. Sometimes we struggle, and we're going to look at how we identify them. But we have these fears, and we struggle to do something about them, because no amount of Bible knowledge seems to fix the problem. We can know everything and still be fearful. So I trust that wherever you are on this continuum, God will speak to you this morning. Now, when we are looking at this, there are so many stories we could pick from Scripture that look at this whole idea of fear. I mean, just think about these. Abraham was told to leave his home and move to another part of the world, and God didn't tell him where he was going until he was on the way. Right? That's packing up the U-Haul, putting everything in the back, and saying, all right, kids, here we go. We're driving in that direction, and that's all you know. That's terrifying. How about Moses? I want you to lead this entire nation of hundreds of thousands of people into the desert with no idea how he's going to feed them, give them something to drink, care for them, whatever. Again, scary. How about Gideon? A guy who faced this huge army of 100,000 people, and he had 300 men, and God said, yeah, it's enough. Go get it done. Terrifying. Joshua, he had to conquer an entire country with an inexperienced, much smaller, not as well-equipped force of men. David, we all know that story. He's this huge, seasoned warrior, and the weapon I got 5 rocks. That's my thing. Jeremiah, prophet who had to give bad news to an entire nation, and it was the kind of news that could get him killed. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they said no to worshiping an idol. Where did they end up? The fiery furnace. Daniel, he refused to worship the emperor at the risk of the lion's den. Esther had to risk her life in front of a pagan king who could kill her with a word if he didn't like what she said. You have the disciples. I mean, goodness, they were in a boat faced with this possibility of drowning in a storm. These same disciples, after Jesus had left, had to face the same people that killed Jesus and now wanted to kill them. And we could go on and on and on. Great stories, they inspire us, but sometimes they're not all that helpful. Because most, if not all of us, do not face that kind of fear. Most of us are not standing in front of a world leader or being risk-throwing to lions. I mean, they're kind of cool stories and they're amazing, but sometimes it's a little hard to identify with them. But here's the key idea. If we want to not let fear sabotage our souls, like Mike was talking about last week, we have to be able to identify what they are. And so what we're going to look at this morning is, what do we do with it? Like we already talked about last week, Mike unpacked this whole idea of where the fears are and what they do to us, and they change our perspective, they skew everything. Well, how do we address them? What do we do with that? So here's the first thing we have to do, is we have to actually identify them. And this is trickier than it seems, by the way, because sometimes we can't even see them. I've been in lots of groups with people who say, I'm not fearful. I don't fear anything. I'll do anything. And I always think, yeah, you do, because I've watched it. But it's tricky, especially, talking now just to guys, for us, because there's some image stuff that's up in here, right? Rightly or wrongly, when you get together with guys, the first thing you don't say is, guys, I just want to share what I'm so scared of. Right? That's not how guys talk. They're like, yeah, I would do that. Oh, I've done that. And you get this like, I did that. Well, I did this. Well, I did this. I jumped out of an airplane with bombs on my back. I mean, they're all going somewhere with it because that's how guys are. It's just one of those little things that we have to be wary of. And so what happens is we don't even necessarily identify our fears. We think, well, I don't have any. Or we use other words. Because they say, well, I'm not fearful. I'm not fearful. I mean, I might feel a little bit helpless, or I might be worried once in a while. Sometimes I don't feel worthy of kind of what people are saying about me. I sometimes get a little bit insecure. I kind of feel a little bit anxious about this. Man, I am stressed out. You know what? It's kind of a vulnerable position to be in. Or, I feel a little bit nervous what's going on. Or, man, I am just overwhelmed right now. I'm desperate for something to happen. You could replace all of those with, I am fearful. But we don't want to think of it that way because there's something about that doesn't feel right. But God says, look, if we're going to deal with this area of life, you have to understand what they are. There's a very interesting story. You're all familiar with it. When the disciples are crossing the lake in their boat, and remember, these are some seasoned sailors, and Jesus is sleeping, and they're going through the storm. They think they're going to get swamped. The boat's going to turn over. They're all going to drown. And if you've ever been on a lake or something when it's really stormy, like this is a real fear. So the disciples went and they woke Jesus and they said, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. And if you remember, he gets up and he replies, you have little faith. And then he says this, why are you so afraid? And then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. I used to think this was like a rebuke, right? Why are you so afraid? I don't, that doesn't jive with what you see of Jesus, because Jesus told people frequently, don't be afraid. He doesn't say don't be afraid. He says, why? Guys, I'm here. What is underlying? What are you actually afraid of? I believe Jesus wanted the disciples not just to, he said, look, it's not that you don't have to be afraid, but I want you to understand what's going on. Why is this so troubling to you? Because before we can do anything about our fears, we have to identify them, because we don't want to be blindsided by them. And if you will not admit your fears, you will never overcome them. So how do we do this? How do we identify our fears? And I'd just give this, and I'll unpack this a little bit, but give some thought to your thoughts and emotions. Like, pay attention to them. So here's what I mean by that. When you have nothing to think about, your mind tends to drift towards its most pressing issue. So pay attention to where your mind goes when you're not busy. So for some of us, it's like, okay, I'm finally got time. We got the season of mowing lawns again. I'm out in the yard. And you begin to mow, and you don't have the headphones in. You're just quiet. And you find your mind going certain directions. Pay attention to where your mind goes. Because what often happens is our minds are a great clue in what we're thinking about and identifying things we might be fearful of. Pay attention to your response to certain things. Like, where do you feel adrenaline kicking in? I mean, specifically, think about some questions like this. When do you feel the need to run? Now, I know lots of people say, I never run. Okay, I understand you're not running away in physical sense, but when do you feel the need to shut down? Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like when you're like, you know what, something begins to overwhelm you. You're like, you know what, I'm just not thinking about that right now. I'm having ice cream, I'm watching TV, I'm not going to think about it. I'm going shopping. Or more negatively, we dive into, to alcohol or pornography or something else. We're running from it. I don't want to turn, I want to have, we put our mind in different places. When does that happen for you? And it could also be, when do you resort to passive aggressiveness? They're all signs that there's something going on. Pay attention to when those pop up. Or, on the flip side, pay attention to when you go at it. When you say, I am going to win. Because if you're a very aggressive person who wants to win arguments, who kind of goes after things, and when that happens, it can actually be an indicator of fear. Because one of the ways we respond to fear is to go after things, say, I'm going to control it. I'm going to get ahead of this thing. I'm going to make sure this doesn't get on. I'm not going to get behind this. I'm going to win. You can't do that to me. And so anger and forcefulness can actually be an indicator of fear. It could simply be defensiveness, just getting more intense, attacking somebody else. You know, I don't know if anybody's Star Trek fans, but you know, when Star Trek, when the ship encounters a new species, what's the very first command they always give? Raise the shields. Oh my goodness, you need more Star Trek fans out here, right? There's always raise the shields. Pay attention to that. When do we do that? When do I begin to raise my shields? Where I start to say, whoa, 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 whoa. They're not getting any closer. No, that's not going to happen. I'm going to block this. I'm not going to engage with this. When do we raise our emotional shields? And that could be anger. It could be manipulation. It could be, when do I get silent or defensive? Maybe if I give you an example, it'll help a little bit. When I became a pastor, there was something that happened that always triggered me. And it would be on a Sunday morning, just like this, and someone would come up to me after the service and say, Pastor, can we set up a time to talk? That's all they would say. And then we'd set up a time, and I would go home and spend the next 3 days before our Wednesday meeting thinking, what did I do? What's wrong with our church? What's falling apart now? And so I had this reaction that would come out of this every single time someone asked the question, because I had underlying fears. So my question to you is, what are your fears? Some of you know right off the top of your heads what they are. There are popular fears, right? The phobias. So we talk about these, we joke about these, you know, like public speaking, spiders, you know, fear of heights, fear of darkness. You know, those are the ones we kind of read about and hear about. Then there's other ones, like some people have a fear of traveling or fear of getting lost. They're like, I watched Taken, I'm not going anywhere because I'm going to get kidnapped, you know, and I'm going to get sold, right? They have different fears, or getting into some strange place and being taken advantage of or killed. They have these kind of fears. But honestly, a lot of our fears are a little more subtle than that. For example, according to the American Psychological Association, do you know that 82% of people suffer from imposter syndrome? Everybody know what imposter syndrome is? Right? If you've never heard of this, it's simply this. They struggle with the sense that they haven't earned everything they've achieved, and somebody's going to find out they're not what they think they are. I'm not as good as I thought I was. Or you know what? Somebody somewhere is going to find out I'm not as smart, I'm not as talented, I'm not whatever. And so they go through life with this fear that they're going to be found out. People fear not having enough money to retire. What am I going to do? I'm going to have to keep working till I'm 80. I don't have enough money set aside for emergencies. Some people fear what others will think of them. They worry that they're going to be mocked or minimized or dismissed by other people, especially if I do this or I do this. Some people fear that I don't want to lead others poorly. If I do this, I'm going to lead people down the wrong path. There's some people fear that they're not going to have any legacy, that when they leave this world, no one's going to care, no one's going to notice. Some people are fearful because they say, I don't know if my health is ever going to get better. I'm fearful that I'm going to have to live the rest of my life in pain, or I'm fearful that my health is going to trigger this emergency in my life, and I never know when that's going to happen. Many Christ followers are fearful that their family members who are currently not following Jesus might never come to Him. People are fearful about their businesses failing, about being alone, and my friends, the list goes on and on and on. But here's the thing. God will often bring us face to face with our fears. And not because He's mean, but He wants us to surrender our fears and find freedom in Him. It seemed for a while like I had people coming to me all the time saying, I want to have a conversation with you. And I got tired of it. Because every time I'm like, oh God, what's going to happen now? And it wasn't that God was being mean to me, but He says, you need to identify this. Because what you're doing is every single time someone has this comment to you, you're immediately thinking about the worst. You're thinking that they're going to have a problem with your leadership, they're going to have a problem with the church, or it's going to be a conflict with someone else that you don't want to get involved with. It's going to be a mess. You don't want a part of it. And he says, you need to not do this, Weldon, because what happens is when you feel this way, you start to shut down, you put off decisions, and you get distracted with other things. Because I was fearful of what people might think or say of me or something that I was in charge of. At its most basic, fear is simply an expression of this idea that I and I alone am responsible for the outcome of my life. So what does fear look like to you? So we're going to pause for a second. If you have a pen, you can write down. If you have a phone, you can type into your phone. I want you to take a minute, and I want you to write it down. If you have 20, don't write down all 20. Just pick 2 or 1. Perhaps it's a fear you've carried with you your whole life. Fear of being rejected, a fear of being left alone. Maybe it's based on your past experiences, a fear that you'll never have enough. Maybe it's a fear that has to do with getting older, saying, you know what, I can't do what I used to do. What am I going to do with these last 20 years of my life? Maybe it's just a fear of what others will say. When I was in high school, the biggest fear was always being mocked, made fun of, ostracized, put on the edges, not belonging. And you can keep on thinking about this. More than might occur to you as time goes on. But let me ask you this. Okay. Let's say you identified your fears. And in a moment of vulnerability, I'll tell you, one of mine has always been retirement. And now it's a lot closer than it used to be. And it's funny because fears are subtle. I actually have zero fears that God will not take care of me. I've grown up in the church. I believe God will supply all my needs. I'm never going to be living in a cardboard box on the side of the road. You know, God is always going to take me. But you know what my fear is? That I'll only have enough to live, but not to do anything fun. That I'll spend the last 15 years of my life sitting in my house, taking walks around the block, but not be able to do anything. Is it a rational fear? Probably not. Doesn't mean it's not real. So what do you do with that? You've written down, some of you have it in your head, some of you have like, I got lots of them. Some of you are like, I still don't know if I even have one. But when you've identified one, what do you do with it? Because let me tell you what is not helpful. When someone says, don't worry about it. How does that help you? Oh, I'm fearful of this. Oh, you shouldn't be afraid. Oh, well, you just solved all my problems. Okay? It doesn't work. And in fact, more information doesn't necessarily help. When someone says, oh, you shouldn't be afraid of flying, airplanes are the best, most safest way to travel. You're like, or, you know what, the odds of that happening to you and your family, I mean, they're practically zero. You know what? The Bible says if you train up a child, they will not depart from it. It's all good. And do you know why that doesn't work? Because somewhere in the back of our mind we think, yeah, but there's always an exception. And what if that's me? Because I saw that plane collide with that helicopter. So it does happen. Maybe it'll happen to me. You know what fear is? We never fear good things. Nobody has ever looked into the future and thought, man, this good thing could happen or this good thing can happen. I'm terrified. That never happens. You know what else we don't fear? What's happening right now. Because you know what we fear? What might happen in the future. That's just what fear is. Fear is always about what is coming or what we think might be coming, and that's what drives our behavior. That's what drives our thing. That's why we want to get away from this. So, what do we do? How do we deal with these fears? We identify them, and I'm going to put this up, but I'm going to unpack it in a second because it sounds like the most pastoral answer you'll ever give. But trust me, it's the key. It's practice the presence of Jesus. Do you remember I said that the most repeated command in the Bible is what? Do not fear, right? Don't be afraid. But we just said that being told don't be afraid doesn't help if you're fearful. Someone says, well, just don't be afraid. Well, that doesn't work. But that's because we don't always look at the entirety of what God says. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of examples. I want you to see there's a theme that'll be pretty clear as we go through this. Genesis, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. In Numbers, do not be afraid of the people of this land, because we will devour them. This is something that Mike read last week. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them, because the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt will be with you. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. To Joshua, don't be afraid, don't be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. David said to Solomon his son, be strong and courageous, do the work, don't be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord God, my God, is with you. Be strong and courageous, don't be afraid or discouraged because of this king of Assyria and this vast army. It's a great story, by the way. For there is a greater power with us than with him. Psalm 118, and this happens all through the Psalms. The Lord is with me. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? Isaiah said, don't be afraid when God was speaking to him, for I am with you. Jeremiah, do not be afraid of them, for I am with you, and I will rescue you. John, this is Jesus talking at the end of his life. He says, look, peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I don't give you as the world gives, so do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. God doesn't just say, don't fear. He says why we don't fear. And it's simply this: I am with you. And this isn't just some rosy kind of feeling thing. Picture, your 4-year-old is afraid of the dark. I mean, they're terrified. They can't sleep. They're crying. They don't do. And you finally say to them, hey, come crawl into bed with mom and dad. They lay down in bed with you, and after they've, flipped on you 3 times and kicked you twice going this way, right? They fall asleep. And they're completely at peace. Why? It's still dark. Because mom and dad are there. And they will take care of anything that will come up. It's the tangible presence of mom and dad that changes everything in how they view the world. The degree to which we experience the presence of God is the degree to which we will overcome our fears. Period. And you show me someone who is so enamored with the presence of God that they can hardly stand it, I will show you a person who is fearless. Well, how do we do that? It's fine for me to say practice the presence of Jesus. Well, Paul, who was well acquainted with all this, and if anybody had a reason to be fearful, Paul did, because he was stoned, he was beaten, he was shipwrecked, he was waylaid by bandits, he traveled all over the world. I mean, he just this totally crazy life. He said this: rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Don't be anxious, fearful about anything. But in everything, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which is the thing every one of us craves, transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Paul gives some really practical ways to practice the presence of Jesus. And I'm going to give them 3 really quick, and then we're going to practice, okay? Practice praise and gratitude. He starts out by saying, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. So before he even tells them to not be anxious and afraid, he says, rejoice. Why would he do that? Because honestly, when we're fearful, the last thing we want to do is worship or rejoice. That's because worship and rejoicing puts the focus on God and not on me. And do you know there's only 2 times in your life when you should worship and rejoice? Do you know when those are? When you feel like it and when you don't feel like it. That's right. Why? Because it changes the focus. I remember once I felt convicted to journal thanksgiving to God every day for a year. That was not easy. I'm telling you, there were days I was just making it up. Thank God, I guess I got to be thankful for something because right now I don't feel thankful about anything. But it was a great exercise because it was this exercise in putting the focus on Jesus. Because rejoicing in worship and fear are antithetical to each other. They cannot coexist at the same time. So Paul says, look, lean into this. Put your focus off that. Think of things that God has done, will do, or who he is that you can rejoice in. That's number one. But he goes on. He says, and if you want to deal with fear, lay it out before him. Look what he says. He says, don't be anxious about anything. But he follows that by saying, by the way, the reason is because in everything, by petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God. In other words, bring it to God. He knows you're scared anyway. Just admit it. Right? I don't care if you're 6'4", 280 pounds and a weightlifter. You go to God and say, I'm a scared little boy. I can't, He knows anyway. Just tell him. You don't have to tell anybody else, but tell God. Lay it out before him. God, this is my fear. If I do this and if I don't control this, my kids are going off the rails and I'm so fearful that they're never going to come back to you. God, it terrifies me. Lay it out for him. Tell him. When we bring our fears to him in that manner, we're still putting the focus on him. God, these are my fears, but I'm telling you. Because I need you to be with me. I need to soak in your presence because this is what I'm feeling. 3, slow down your response. He says this. He says, let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near, which is kind of an odd thing to write in the middle of this, don't be anxious, but pray. Like, what does gentleness have to do with anything? But gentleness is what we would call a soft reaction. You can't react with gentleness like this. It's not one of those, when you have a reaction, it's usually of anger or irritation. You don't have that with gentleness. Gentleness is a considered, soft response. It's almost like Paul saying, whoa, slow down. Slow down. I understand that you're anxious, so take a moment. Don't just react. Because when we're fearful, then we act in controlling, angry, defensive, protective ways. You all remember this verse from the Psalms, right? Be still and know that I am God. Anybody heard that one? Right? We're pretty familiar with it. Have you ever heard the context? Because the psalm that he wrote that in starts out like this. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, the mountains fall in the heart of the sea, the waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with surging. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice and the earth melts. This is a psalm where he's saying, God, the world is a mess. It is falling apart. I am threatened in every way. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to do nothing. And just slow down and be still. And then lastly, let Jesus give you peace. Paul finishes by saying, when you do this, the peace of God, and it doesn't even make sense. That's what he means. When he says it transcends understanding, it means you'll feel peaceful when you shouldn't feel peaceful. And people around you will be like, what is wrong with you? Why are you not more afraid? That will be yours. It's the ability to not be worried, to not obsess, to not be fearful. We can have peace in the midst of fear-inducing situations. But that is a byproduct of having a fixation on Jesus on his throne. Our temptation is, instead of fixing our attention on Jesus, is to go to those things that are comfortable to us, that we like to do. Eating, drinking, shopping, being busy, work, you name it. And yet God says, no, stop, slow down, bring it to me. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up. And I want you to think about the fear that you wrote down, or the fear that you thought about, the one that's in your head, or just anything that you were considering earlier. And they're going to be singing a song called Sovereign. And as they do that, I just want you to stay seated for this. You can sing along if you want, but what I'm encouraging you to do is just to do exactly what we've talked about. Use the song to say, okay, God, I want to rejoice in you because you are good and you have done good things. You've done good things in my life, and so I want to admit that to you. But God, here's my fears. I'm laying them out for you. You are amazing. You are great, but here's what it is. Here's what I genuinely, and I don't know how to get around it. I don't know how to not feel this. This is my fear. So I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm not going to rush into anything. And I'm going to let you, the sovereign one of all, bring some peace into my heart right now. So if you guys would just lead us in that.
Sovereign in the mountain air, sovereign on the ocean floor, with me in the calm, with me in the storm, sovereign in my greatest joy, sovereign in my deepest cry, with me in the dark, with me at the dawn. In your everlasting arms, all the pieces of my life, from beginning to the end, I can trust you. In your never-failing love, you work everything for good. God, whatever comes my way, I will trust you. Sovereign in the mountain air, sovereign on the ocean floor, with me in the calm, with me in the storm, sovereign in my greatest joy, sovereign in my deepest pride, with me in the dark, with me at the dawn. In your everlasting arms, all the pieces of my life, from beginning to the end, I can trust you. In your never-failing love, you work everything for good. God, whatever comes my way, I will trust you. God, whatever comes my way, I will trust you. All my hopes, all I need, held in your hands. All my life, all of me, held in your hands. All my fears, all my dreams, held in your hands. All my hopes, all I need, held in your hand. All my life, all of me, held in your hands. All my fears, all my dreams, held in your hands. In your everlasting arms, all the pieces of my life, from beginning to the end, I can trust you. In your never-failing love, you work everything for good. God, whatever comes my way, I will trust you. God, whatever comes my way, I will trust you. God, whatever comes my way, I will trust you.
You see, fear, at its very root, is the statement to God, I don't trust you. And that's why we can identify our fears, we can practice the presence of Jesus, but it always needs to lead us to this third step, which is to actively surrender to God. You know that when we have fears, they're usually wrapped around things that bad that have happened, are going to happen, they're in the midst of happening, we fear what's going to come. We have this question we tend to ask God, which is, why? Why is this happening, God? Why would you let this happen? Why have you not taken care of me? Why? And it's not a bad question in the sense that God invites us to ask that question, but it's not the best question when we're facing our fears. I read a great quote this week because faith and fear are opposites of each other. That's why Jesus always invited us to have faith, not fear. But I read this great quote. It said, faith does not guarantee that everything will work out the way we want it to. Faith trusts God regardless of how things work out, because we aren't only trusting Him to control our circumstances, rather we are building a trusting, loving relationship with God as our Savior and Redeemer in a fallen world. Until we shift from trusting good results to trusting God in bad results, we don't really trust God at all. We have all these fears, and what God is saying is, why are you afraid? Trust me. I've proven my love already in my Son. I sent Him to die for you. Will you now trust me? No matter how sticky your situation is or how difficult you think your circumstances might be, will you trust the God of the cross? So a better question might be, all right, God, I'm fearful, but how are you going to redeem this in me? How can you take this situation, God, and the thing that makes me so fearful and redeem it, and what role am I to play in that process? How can I cooperate with the shaping hand of God in my fears? Because God is with us, and He is for us. Surrender says, God, I trust you enough to move in your direction, because here is the end truth of it all. Overcoming your fears always involves action. We need to move in the opposite direction of our fears. When our fears say, oh my goodness, I can't do this, God's going to do this, instead of letting the wind blow us with our fears, we need to turn into it and say, okay, God, this is what I'm fearful of. I'm going to embrace it, and I'm going to embrace you. I'm going to practice your presence, which will lead me to trust you, and then I'm going to do whatever you call me to do. And sometimes it's to do something, and sometimes it's to let go of something. That same author said this: we can either act on fear or we can act on faith, but we cannot act on both. We can feel afraid and act on faith, but we can't act on both. So don't hear me. Don't walk away from today saying, oh, I guess I just have to always feel bold. No, that's not the issue, right? You can feel fear. That's normal. But God says, now work with me. Trust me. Jesus is saying, look, stop trying to pray out of your life the things I want to bring into your life to make you the person I want you to be. And just cooperate with me in this. And we can choose that in that process. Fear can keep us from growth and opportunities, but it doesn't have to. I heard a story of a workman who was employed on a building project. He was working at night, and he was on the edge of the wall and several stories up, and he lost his balance. Fell, but he managed to, grab the edge of the wall. And he was desperate. He was clinging to it, hoping that someone would discover his plight. But he was in darkness, right? He was below the level of the wall, so you couldn't really see him. There was machines going. No one could hear him yelling and screaming. And the engines, all the myriad of sounds. And so he could slowly feel his arms begin to go numb. His fingers began to, relax, where he just couldn't hold on anymore. And he frantically, he's praying. No miracle is occurring. And at last, his fingers in terror slip from the wall, and he falls 3 inches onto the wood that was right underneath him. And I wonder, in our fears, are we just holding on? And God's saying, let go. I've got you. We need to actively surrender to Him. Fear can keep us from growth and opportunities. So admit your fears. Identify them. And by the way, if you can't identify them, someone close to you knows what they are. Practice the presence of Jesus and then use that to surrender and move in the direction of your fear. It's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. And it helps to pray with others over these things. So do that. Share them. It's amazing how when you share it and someone else goes, oh yeah, I'm in the same boat as you, all of a sudden your fear loses its power. So as we sing, I want you to stand. We're going to sing this last song together. And then if you want someone to pray with you, there will be a team up at the front. They would love to just pray God's blessing over you as you look your fear straight on and invite God into that process. Let's celebrate Jesus together.